the right equipment. Dr. Paul Bennewitz, civilian scientist, did so using computer equipment and informed the government he had done so, not realizing that by then, in 1983, that the government was in truth as deep into dealing with the aliens as his communications with them revealed. Dr. Bennewitz lives next to Manzano Weapons Storage Area in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He observed UFOs constantly over the area and initially decided that they were a threat to the installation. He proceeded to figure out a coding system and attempted and was successful in communicating with the aliens that were flying over the area. What he found out is that after initial contacts with the aliens years ago, we agreed to provide them with bases underground in the United States in return for certain technological secrets which the aliens would reveal to us. The aliens would also be allowed to carry out certain operations, abductions, and mutilations without intervention. The original contact between the government and the extraterrestrial biological entities, two are great in color and about 3.5 to 4.5 feet high, hereafter referred to as the Greats, was achieved between 1947 and 1951. We knew that the Greats were instrumental in performing the mutilations of animals and some humans, and that they were using the glandular substances derived from these materials for food absorbed through the skin and to clone more Greats in their underground laboratories. The government was also aware that the Greats performed some of the abductions to secure genetic materials. The government insisted that the Greats provide them with a list that would be presented to the National Security Council. Through all this, the government thought that the Greats were basically tolerable creatures, although a bit distasteful. They presumed at the time that it was not unreasonable to assume that the public would and could get used to their presence. Between 1968 and 1969, the plan was formulated to make the public aware of their existence over the succeeding 20 years. This time period would culminate with a series of documentaries that would explain the history and intentions of the Greats. The Greats assured us that the real purpose of the abductions was for monitoring of our civilization, and when we learned that the abductions were a lot more frequent and insidious than we were led to believe, the government became concerned. Their concern was also based on additional information regarding the purposes for the abductions. So insertion of a 3mm spherical biological monitoring device through the nasal cavity into the brain of the abductee. So implementing subliminal post-hypnotic suggestions that would compel the abductee to perform some specific act at a time to be within the next 2 to 5 years. Genetic crossbreeding between the Greats and human beings. So insertion of discoid monitoring devices into the muscle tissue of the abductees. Presence of these has been verified by X-ray. By the time we had found out the truth about the intentions of the Greats, they intend to stay here and stay in control of our world. It was too late. We had already sold out humanity. Not that it would have made any difference, because they were here doing what they were doing anyway. In 1983, a story was outlined by government sources that said that the Greats are responsible for our biological evolution through manipulation of the DNA of already evolving primates on this planet. Various time intervals of the DNA manipulation were specified for 25,000, 15,000, 5,000, and 2,500 years ago. Originally, the government thought that the Greats meant us no harm, but today, in 1988, the picture that is emerging is exactly the opposite. The story now is one of great deception at several different levels. The Greats Trojan horse-style manipulation and lying which allied MJ-12 forces with them for decades ago. The government's disinformation of the subject of UFOs in order to perpetuate the agreement with the Greats free of public scrutiny. The lies to the abductees. The great ongoing abduction of people and mutilation of animals in order to harvest enzymes, blood and other tissues for their own survival needs. And a genetic blend of the great race and a tall Nordic race to enable great interface with humans to be done with greater ease. Information from a source at a Southwest Army base reveals that these multiple levels of deception are true. It is also indicated that the goal of SDI Star Wars is actually to follow through with an attack proposed by the Greys on the Nordics when they arrive en masse between now and 1992. This time schedule seems to match with the post-hypnotic programming of many abductees for actions between the next 2 to 5 years. This same source sees the world dominated and controlled by the Greys in a way similar to that portrayed in the V television series. They are concerned only for their own survival agenda, and this agenda requires biological substances from other life forms on our planet. The apparent reasoning for the Grey preoccupation with this is due to their lack of a formal digestive tract and the fact that they absorb nutrients and excrete waste directly through the skin. The substances that they acquire are mixed with hydrogen peroxide and painted on their skin, allowing absorption of the required nutrients. It is construed from this that some weaponry against them might be geared in this direction. O.H.Kryll Part 2 Confidential The Situation Report on our acquisition of advanced technology and interaction with alien cultures by O.H.Kryll Observations by a visiting Nordic in October 1987. UFO researcher George Andrews was successfully able to contact one of the Nordics not associated with the Greys through a woman in California. What follows are the comments made by the alien. Were you a culture about to invade, you would not do it with a flourish of ships showing up in the heavens and undergo risk of being fired upon. That's the type of warfare slightly less evolved beings get into. You would create intense confusion and disagreement with only inferences to your presence. Inferences which would in turn cause controversial disagreement. The Greys are insidious little fiends. They did exactly to us what they're doing here to you. You are not on the verge of an invasion. You are not in the middle of an invasion. The invasion has already taken place. It's merely in its final stages. What would you invade? Here he describes the operational plan of the Greys from the beginning. You would go to the most secret of communities within a society. In the case of the United States, you would go and infiltrate the CIA. You would take over some of them and you would take over part of the KGB. You would create great dissension and disagreement between factions of the public at large, some groups saying they have seen UFOs, others saying no, this is not possible. You would involve two major countries in an ongoing idiotic philosophical disagreement so that while the Soviet Union and the United States constantly battle back and forth about who has which piece of territory or whether one invades Iran or whether one invades Afghanistan or whatever, whether one dismantles one nuclear warhead or the other dismantles another group of warheads, you would sit back and laugh if you had the capacity to laugh. You would present yourself indeed to some in a group who would protect you. CIA or MJ-12 thinking they had a more secret and more perfect knowledge of something than anyone else on this planet had, and they would covet you and you would trust their own greed and you would trust their own mass stupidity to trap them. And you'd do it on both sides. You'd show yourself to some of the mass populace to further involve factions of the government in an attempt to shut them up, to keep them even more busy quieting them and trying to stop more information about UFOs from getting out. You'd have the mass populace to a state where they distrusted the government. Oh, why don't they believe us? Why can't they understand that these things are really happening? We're not crazy. So you would have battles constantly about whether UFOs exist or they don't exist. You would have the public and the government at each other's throats. You would set to major superpowers at each other's throats. And you would have set up groups like haves, the wealthy but contented, and the have-nots. You would plant the seeds of massive discontent. Eventually you might have some show of ships landing in the 1990s. One or two. By the time they have landed, be assured they will be in complete control. You will start doing crossbreeds and more crossbreeds, generation after generation. You bribe the government with a few tidbits, the Star Wars system. You tease and tempt the Soviet Union with a laser system far finer than any of their own scientists could think of. And you always have that subtle inference, just on the borderline of consciousness, so that UFOs don't seem too believable. Yet you keep it couched in secrecy and make it seem quite so insane that no one would believe them. On top of it, you would unleash forces that would want to kill them UFO contactees if they disclosed that the CIA is dealing with the exact same thing the contact victim island maybe 100 or 200 years from now. Some of the greats will even physically mingle, and you may have some creatures walking around who are pretty much hybrids between greats and your own race. For now, anything that walks around will look much like yourselves. It's simpler. It holds down on mass panic. Everyone who has experiences with them great will be at odds with the government. To add to that, we will go into a complete phase of earthquake after earthquake and upheaval after upheaval. The inner core of the CIA is deeply controlled by the greats. The CIA sees interaction with the greats as a path to greater scientific achievement. One reason you are seeing so many different kinds of UFOs is that other cultures are watching with extreme interest. Scientists from other cultures arrive to watch. The greats have not only taken over the intelligence agencies, they have also taken over what those agencies call lunatic fringe groups. Well, that's what the Nordic had to say. The source of this also makes the following commentary. The ultimate evil is that next form of psychological complacency that leads one to adhere to a group philosophy rather than eke out one's own horizons. As soon as you acquire an awareness of being a so-called chosen special group, you are on the way to a fall. That is the seed of destruction in any society and any culture, and it leaves it vulnerable. It will be the eventual undoing of the greats as well. They see not their error, it is the very weakness they seize upon that is their own inherent weakness. To try and change a great or a cultish type of star person or a CIA member is futile. It will happen, but all in its own good time. It is the spirit that makes anyone stand up and disagree with something that is untrue and incorrect that will be the thorn in the side of the greats and the other forces that have allied with them. During the occupation of the greats, they have established quite a number of underground bases all over the world, especially in the United States. One such base, among others, in the same state is under Archuleta Mesa, which is about 2.5 miles northwest of Dulce, New Mexico. Details about that base have come across by way of two sources. The first source is by way of an abduction of a woman and her son who witnessed the pickup of a calf for extraction of biological materials. In May 1980, the most interesting case occurred in northern New Mexico. The mother and her son were driving on a rural highway near Cimarron when they observed two craft in the process of abducting a calf. Both of them were then abducted and taken on separate craft to the underground installation, where the woman witnessed the mutilation of the calf. It was alleged that she also observed vats containing cattle body parts floating in a liquid, and another vat containing the body of a male human. The woman was subjected to an exam, and it was further alleged that small metallic objects were implanted into her body as well as into her son's body. More than one source has informed us that CAT scans have confirmed the presence of these implants.